This is Stolen Realm, sort of a micro CRPG, effectively, where you go on a set of small adventures as a party of anywhere from 1 to 6, dependent on how you feel that day, and just sort of go through each of these little areas, building up power for that one run, although this is not a roguelite, I should mention, and complete each of these runs to get new gear for each of your characters, level them up, and get new skills for them, and get more and more powerful, and eventually take on the next story mission that will progress you to the next stage of the game. It's a pretty lightweight game in that regard. You can just, spend half an hour on it in a day if you want to and feel like you've accomplished something because each adventure is sort of its own self-contained small series of battles in a small area that you can complete in a pretty short period of time. The game uses a really nice art style. It's got hex-based everything. In battle, everything is hex-based, as well as outside of battle, just exploring the world and things, that's all hex-based. But this makes the whole game kind of have like a board game aesthetic, like everything is made of hexes, a little bit like Hero Questy kind of. And all of the models use a sort of low detail, flat shading voxel sort of look that has a fair bit of character, and it helps that the animations are actually pretty nice for this sort of thing. And the actual world itself has a good amount of detail. I don't know why, but I've been a fan of like panoramas for a long time, as in like little miniature microcosms of larger scenes. I don't know exactly what it is about it, but ever since I was a kid, I've really loved little like compressed panoramas that are just packed with detail on a really small scale, and this sort of reminds me of that, especially the battle scenes being effectively like little panoramas of larger battlefields. So it's very like visually pleasing for me to see that sort of thing, and it's nice how much environmental detail is actually packed into each battle scene. So I mentioned variable party size, and that's actually the case here. You need, of course, at least one person, obviously, but you can have up to 6. And the thing is, the game actually scales its difficulty based on how many party members you have, which I think is a pretty cool feature. That means it's completely flexible as to how many people you want to bring on your adventure, and you make each one of them individually. So you can just whip up a new character if you feel like you might want one in your party, or leave them behind if you don't. So do you want to just be a lone wolf with a gigantic greatsword and absolutely no armor, and just go through the whole game murdering things like that solo? Then you totally can. Or if you want a whole, full 6-member party that is carefully constructed to be like, mage, tank, healer, couple extra utility, maybe an assassin and a ranger, you can do all that stuff and make your party exactly how you want it, which I think is really nice. This is something that is kind of a point of contention for some people in CRPGs in general, especially people that are new to the genre, is how many party members do you need to manage? So I like the fact that this is such a lightweight game, for one, and it also allows you to scale the difficulty based on how many party members you have, so you can sort of tailor your own little custom experience that way. The missions themselves take place in something that's almost like a little bitty micro King's Bounty map, sort of. It's like a pretty linear straight line, but it's filled with extra stuff that you can interact with: treasure chests, shrines that give you buffs, rune stones that can enhance your stats, fountains that can restore your HP and MP and stuff like that, and then the actual battles for you to take on. So you sort of explore this little track and go along in this straight line, and it allows you to sort of gather buffs for that one run, and then, fight the next enemy with all the buffs that you've gathered so far. And eventually, when you complete the final boss of that run, you'll be kicked back to town. And town has a couple of different vendors. It has a potion vendor, a sort of skill reset vendor, and a general gear vendor that you can spend your hard-earned gold on, and also sell all of your various items that you get and that you don't need. And then you can go back to the portal and go on a new adventure, either choosing a side quest for some more gear, money, and XP to help level up your team, or the main quest if you feel that your levels are up to it enough to advance the story. The battles themselves are definitely the game's high point, taking place in the aforementioned pretty sizable little panoramic vistas to go through, and each battle, interestingly enough, has a whole bunch of little like totem thingies, usually anywhere from like 2 to 4-ish, and these have a sort of control point aura sort of set up where if you move within a certain distance of them, they buff your party members with whatever they do, but they also, of course, will buff enemies if they go within the area of them as well. And some of them have positives and negatives, like the Reaper Shrine, for instance, that drastically increases the damage any character within its area does, but also drastically increases the damage they take. This does mean that despite the sort of microcosm CRPG that this game is, it does retain the classic CRPG combat formula. That means that positioning and maneuvering is very, very important, because you want to not only be within certain ranges of different enemies depending on what they can do versus what you can do and how much health you have and stuff, but you also want to be taking advantage of these control point-like totem dealies throughout the area, and also try and make sure that other enemies are not taking advantage of them, so baiting them out of range of them, or making sure your melee melee characters sort of taunt enemies in front of them and sort of keep them from getting the aura while the melee enemy stands at the very edge of the aura, stuff like that. You know, just your general sort of CRPG strategic positioning stuff that you would want to be in a combat system like this. Every character has a selection of skills that they can use, and of course your traditional health and mana system, and you just bash things until they die, basically. And this game does have a particularly satisfying method of killing enemies that ragdolls them, which is pretty rare from this sort of isometric angle, but it's very funny to see, especially when they fall off the entire, like, panoramic border and just, like, fall into the void of nothingness. It is really satisfying, admittedly, to, like, slam an enemy with a huge hammer and see them go flying over the mountains in the back. It is pretty great. But to me, the biggest strength of the game is actually the game's character building system and skill system. So your characters have the traditional spread of stats, you know, like might that increases the damage of all of your skills and spells and all that, vitality for extra health, all those things that you would expect, and every time they level up you can put points into those stats to make them stronger, but there's also a skill system, and the skill system in this game is really, really cool. It takes place on a very large selection of skill trees. There are, I think, 8 different skill trees that you can choose from, and there are a total of like 240-ish skills, both passive and active, for you to actually peruse throughout all of these trees. And the trees are split into things like elemental trees, like cold damage, lightning, fire, and shadow, and also for just general use, like warrior and rogue and ranger trees. And the really cool thing is you are not limited whatsoever as to who goes into what skills. You can build anyone into anything you want just by putting the various level up points that you have into any of these skill trees that you desire. You can focus on one singular skill tree and get super deep into it by unlocking all the various tiers of active and passive skills within that tree, or you can sort of sprinkle around and have a shallower dive into multiple skill trees, giving them more flexibility but less like tremendous overall power. It's a really cool character building system that means you can build entirely custom characters to do whatever you want. So what I ended up with personally was a 3-person party because I found that to be very manageable, with a sort of wizard at the front. The wizard was using mostly lightning spells combined with the shadow spells and was focused on like high lightning DPS and summoning skeletal minions around the place, often summoning them within the range of those towers to benefit from their effects, combined with a warrior that was sort of a paladin-y warrior type of character that was extremely tanky and using two-handed weapons and had bonuses specifically for using two-handed weapons and foregoing shields, with a skill set based on rushing into the enemy lines and keeping their attention while being able to deal out tons of damage and debuff them for my other damage-dealing characters to take advantage of from the back. And then finally, a sort of ranger character that was actually focused on guns rather than bows, and was using a summoned raven companion as well as some ice magic to round out the rest of their arsenal, making them extra flexible when it came to ranged damage. That is just what I came up with in my early hours of playing, and I'm sure you can come up with even more creative stuff yourself. It's a really cool system with how it lets you build any character to be whatever, and I really, really like the depth that these skill trees actually offers. This is definitely the highest point of the game for me because I love character customization, I love variety in builds, so the fact that this game has so much build variety is definitely a huge point in its favor. What about the early access though? What about the stuff that's missing or some stuff that I would like to see added or changed? Well, for one, I actually would like to see maybe a couple more skill trees, maybe round it out to 10, even though the amount of skills in the game is already very nice, and if they keep it at this, it's still going to be great. But I would like to see maybe like a more nature-themed tree, something kind of druidy, you know, using nature magic and maybe some beast transformations and stuff like that. And I would also like to see perhaps like an earth tree that's focused on doing like ranged physical damage rather than an elemental damage type, and can also focus on like self-defensive buffs and maybe even some sort of golem transformation that lets them do huge damage and take a lot of threat but be very slow, that sort of thing. I would also like to see more uses for money, because right now there's not a huge point to gathering money. The main thing that you could spend it on is gear in town, but you get much better gear by adventuring. Pretty much the only time you're going to use the town gear vendor is if you make a new character mid-run, and you actually want to gear them out real quick with some stuff before you take them on their first mission. That's about the only time you're going to use him, because most of the time the stuff that he sells isn't anywhere near as good as the stuff that you're going to find. I would like to be able to invest gold to actually improve the starting town, you know, unlock new vendors, give me some other various benefits, maybe even a guy that lets me customize the difficulty a little bit by, say, spending money to put a curse on myself that gives me like 1 or 2 extra demon enemies that appear in each combat in the next mission, but if I'm able to beat them, I can come back to him and claim some sort of powerful mythic artifact that I can only get from completing his challenges. That sort of thing, like self-imposed risk-reward stuff that allows me to invest some money to improve my team in a different direction than just normal adventures. Also, right now, all of the missions follow the same basic formula. It will always be a series of 3 battles, as well as about 6 interactable points along the map. They could be treasure chests or shrines or fountains or mining nodes or various things, but there'll be about 6 of them. I would like to see maybe some more variance in the missions, maybe some unexpected stuff, and like I said earlier, some more like self-imposed challenge stuff that lets me alter what I'm actually going to face for better rewards. Right now, the only thing you can alter is the level, which is really cool. I like that. It's nice that you can change the level of the missions before you go on them. That way, if you make a new character mid-run, you can sort of farm them up really quick on some lower level missions, and then take the whole party on much higher level missions later. But I think some additions to the variety of that mission formula would be very nice to have. There's also not much of a story yet, but I assume most of that is, of course, coming in the future once more of the actual story act stuff is done, so I can't really complain about that too much. That's just how this sort of thing works. One thing I really would like to see, though, is embracing the variety of the character build system by giving your characters temporary skills more often. Right now, occasionally you'll get an extra skill from a piece of equipment, which is nice, but I think it would be a lot more interesting if you could get like super exotic, weird equipment by doing things that had like late level skills in them, or maybe some of the temporary shrine type things you came across in a mission could sometimes give a character some sort of skill that they don't have. I think this would be really cool because it would embrace the variety of the game's building system and would also potentially give the players more of an idea of how they want to build their characters, because they might get some sort of high level cold skill that they didn't even know existed and be like, actually that was really fun to have, maybe I should start building that character kind of in that direction from now on, and it would just sort of embrace the variety that the game has. You know, I think really all of my wishes for this game are exactly that, to embrace its variety. I want it to go crazy with the variety that the game has because I think that's its best point. And I think the more that the game leans into all the crazy builds and all the sort of weirdness and extra unexpected variety that it can throw in there, the better it'll be in the long run. So that is my current look at Stolen Realm, a pretty interesting sort of microcosm CRPG that's definitely worth a try if you enjoy these sorts of things like I do. The link will be in the description below this video if you want to check it out yourself. The Steam page is down there. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.